I'll now invite our three candidates to come and join me up on the stage, and our three candidates are Kate Ashmore, the Liberal Party candidate for Macnamara, Josh Burns, the Labor Party candidate for Macnamara, and Steph Hodgkins-May, the Greens Party candidate for Macnamara. So the format will be that I'll invite each of the candidates to make an opening statement of up to 7 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the floor, and I'll also put some questions to them from the online submissions that were made. But I'll start by, and they've drawn lots to see who goes first, and Steph drew the first lot. So Steph Hodgkins-May is the Greens candidate for Macnamara. She also ran for the Greens in this seat at the last federal election when it was called Melbourne Ports. She's a small business owner and a former planning and environmental lawyer who's also worked as an advisor to the Australian Mission at the United Nations. Steph.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I don't know about you, but Eloisa for PM I think has got a pretty good ring to it. Another round. I too would like to acknowledge the Yalukit Willen of the Boomerang and pay deep respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Our First Nations people have deep and long-standing connections to culture, to our land and to our waterways. And at a time when in our environmental movement we are seeing human rights at the forefront, it's often our First Nations people that are leading the charge against some of the most potentially environmentally destructive projects that we can possibly imagine, and that is included the Great Australian Bight off the coast of South Australia. They're leading the way against gas drilling offshore in South Australia. They're leading the action to stop the Adani mega coal mine, potentially the world's largest mega mine in the Galilee Basin. And they're standing up in opposition to exploration licences that are currently being granted to drill for offshore gas off the coastlines of Victoria. I also acknowledge we are standing on stolen land and we must not give up the fight for justice for our First Nations people. A little about me. I grew up on a farm in Blampede near Daylesford, much like the Dame Jean Annie Macnamara, whom this seat was named after. Our dinner conversations were focused on talking about rainfall and the seasons, and I learnt from a very young age how precious our ecosystems are, how delicate our land and water supply is, and how we must fight to protect them. It was this knowledge that encouraged me to pursue a career in planning and environment law, and I headed off to work in a corporate law firm in the CBD. But before long I realised that our environmental laws are not there to protect our environment. They're actually stacked up against the environment and often there for the largest bidder to overcome. I spent some time working with the Environment Defenders Office, who are now Environment Justice, and they do an extraordinary job. But a lot of their work is spent raising money to survive rather than doing the deeply important environmental defence work that they need to be doing. It was at that time that I thought perhaps, changing some of our policies at an international level might help us move towards greater action on environmental protection and climate change. So I started studying international development and spent some time working in Samoa, a low-lying Pacific neighbour of ours who have got a huge fight on their hands. I worked with an organisation called Women in Business, and we travelled the countryside learning about some of the impacts of climate change are going to have on low-lying farming communities. In 2009, a tsunami rocked Samoa and took with it my mother's life as well as the lives of about 150 other people. That for me was the jolt that need to do more, and really that our leaders, our so-called leaders, are failing us on climate and environment. I put my hand up to run as a Greens candidate because this is an issue that I am deeply passionate about and deeply committed to. I know there was a quick straw poll at the start of the evening, but I was sitting up the front so I didn't see. So I've just got a few questions for you all. Please put your hand up if you think that donations from the minerals lobby do not belong in politics. Thank you. Put your hand up if you think that we need to stop the Adani megamine. And put your hand up if you're voting for climate this election. Yeah, fairly predictable, thank you. This election is the climate election. And what does that mean? That means we need to rapidly transition to 100% renewable energy, and we need to have a plan to do it. The Greens do have this plan. I was going to wave it around, but it's on my desk. We released this plan last week, and it addresses the major issues that we need to address. Number one is coal. You cannot have a coherent climate policy without mentioning coal. Coal is like the Datsun Sunny. It's clunky, it's old, it's not going to get us to where we need to be. We have opportunities in this new economy to be exporting new industries such as hydrogen. South Korea, Japan are demanding this sort of technology, and it's up to us to lead the nation, lead the world in providing it. The second part that we cannot possibly ignore is domestic transmission. The grid that we're going to see in the next 10 years is going to be vastly different to the grid that we see now. And this grid must be state-owned to ensure fairness, to ensure we drive down electricity prices, and that we connect all these regional hotspots of solar and wind energy across our nation. We must have a coal closure deadline. Without this, we're leaving our coal communities with no vision, no plan, no employment. It's either up to us to create that plan, that transition plan, otherwise it'll be the boardrooms of multinationals deciding their future. And we must have a price on carbon to deal with fugitive emissions, an industry-wide price on carbon. It worked in 2012 when the Greens were in balance of power, and it'll work again. Labor and Liberal, I really do appreciate that Kate is here tonight, but we have seen not only inaction from the Liberal government over the last 6 years, they have taken us back on climate action. They have stood in the way of project after project, and they are stealing the future of our young people like Eloise. Labor, I thank you, you've come up with something, but it is just simply not enough. You need to put aside and put to the back of your mind Abbott's scare campaign. This is not 2013. We need you to show leadership, and we need more detail. We have a unique opportunity here in Macnamara, the Greens' most marginal seat in the country. You have my commitment that if I am elected in this seat, I will spend every working hour working towards a cleaner future for our next generation, for our current generation, and making sure that our next Labor government, because I'm sure as hell positive, I'm pretty sure we're going to kick out this Liberal government, but making sure that our next Labor government is the best government it can be, that it takes us to where we need to be to avert catastrophic climate change. Thank you.
Impressive timing, exactly 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Steph. Okay, a second speaker is Josh Burns, the ALP candidate for Macnamara. Josh is currently a senior advisor to the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews. He's previously worked as a teacher's aide and a factory hand, and in 2014 he stood for the state seat of Caulfield for the ALP.
Well, thank you very much, and it really is a privilege for me to be here to represent the Australian Labor Party at this event. What a fantastic evening tonight is, and I want to thank the organisers and all of the presenters for being here tonight. To Steph and to Kate, this is our first big debate, probably going to be the biggest debate, so good luck tonight and good luck over the next few weeks. I also want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Boomerang, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Steph touched on it, but the Boomerang have had a deep connection to the land and to water for centuries. So much so that the Boomerang used to watch the rivers leading into the ocean, and they used to watch the fish population. And when the fish numbers dropped, the Boomerang used to stop the fishing from the 6 clans and also from visiting clans until as such time as the fish population rised again. The Boomerang were our original conservationists, like so many First Nations. The Boomerang understood the importance of protecting our environment, and they understood the importance of sustainability. And I just want to take this opportunity in front of all of you here tonight to reaffirm the Australian Labor Party's commitment to answer the Uluru Statement from the heart, to answer the call from Aboriginal Australians to help create a voice. Because if ever there was a need for a voice, not just to better the lives of Aboriginal people across our country, but also one that brings with it the wisdom of centuries of protecting our land and our water, it is now. It is now, because we are in a climate emergency. We are in a climate emergency and we need to act. Tonight I'm going to be outlining the Australian Labor Party's policy. I'm going to start by talking about our targets. I want to talk about energy in our opening remarks, and I also want to touch on some of the other measures and policies that we're bringing to this election. So let me start with our targets. We have, on the basis of the Independent Climate Change Authority, set our targets in accordance with the 1.5 degrees. That means that we want to lower our emissions by 45% by 2030. We are not going to be using our Kyoto credits. We will not be carrying over our... Absolutely. This is not about cheap accounting tricks. This is about doing the right thing for us and our future generations. So we will lower our emissions by 45%. We also need to be transforming our energy market where we've set a target of a minimum of 50% by 2030. You know, people like Simon used to walk around and argue that we should be building renewable energy because it's better for the environment, it's good for communities, etc. Now we only have to say that it is cheaper. It is cheaper to build solar and wind partnered with storage capacity in order to bring down our power prices. The Conservative argument is there, and it lies within renewable energy. Renewable energy is our future, and we need to act now, and we need to be incentivising it, as we have done here in Victoria and as we have done in South Australia. In terms of other markets, we have released a suite of policies that are really exciting. The Labor Party will end large-scale land clearing, something that is deeply overdue in this country, something that Queensland Labor has been a leader on, but something that we need to see right across our country. The Labor Party, absolutely. We need to transition away from coal. We need to be transitioning towards cleaner way, which is why we're going to be investing $11 billion into the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, of which $1 billion will be investing into new hydrogen technology and power. We want to create a jobs boom. We are going to have 50% of all new electric vehicles by 2030. Something that, you know, we saw the loss of the car industry under Joe Hockey. Well, we want to bring those jobs back and bring the research and development minds back into our country. We want to see a cleaner way of getting around this country, and it needs to happen right across different industries. And finally, one of the most exciting parts of this whole thing is that we are going to rewrite our environmental protection laws. We are going to create an environmental protection agency with the teeth and the muscle to actually reinforce the new laws. This is the climate election, and quite frankly, this election is not really about me, it's not about my opponents, this is about the direction of our country. This is about the direction that our nation needs to go, and quite frankly, we can't afford another 3 years of coalition government. We need to change our government, and we need to elect a progressive Labor government in our nation, and we will do it, and we will change the way we deal with this issue. We will bring down our emissions. I'm really excited to be here tonight. We have a great story to tell, and I thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
I'm really impressed with the discipline of our speakers keeping to time. They're obviously all prepared for the amount of time they're going to get. That's fantastic. So our final speaker is Kate Ashmore. She's the Liberal Party candidate for Macnamara. She's practiced as a lawyer for the past 13 years, 4 of those, the most recent 4 in her own practice in Caulfield. She served as an elected councillor for the City of Glen Eira. She has chaired the board of the Caulfield Park Bendigo Bank for many years, and she's a former president of the Australian Women Lawyers and has served on many not-for-profit boards. Please welcome Kate Ashmore.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Yalukut Willem clan of the Boon Wurrung, part of the great Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and any other elders here with us this evening. I'm here tonight as a local resident who grew up right here, well, right over there in Elwood, who's now raising her own young children, my 2 daughters, right here in this community. I'm here tonight to listen to you and to learn from you. Climate change is real. I trust the science. I trust the CSIRO, the Bureau of Meteorology, NASA, the IPCC, and David Attenborough. Humanity contributes to climate change, and I agree, we must take action to address this very serious global challenge, and Australia must play her part. We must all play our part, individually and collectively. As individuals, we know that our choices as consumers have an enormous part to play. And the opportunity we have to take action in our local community can also make an immediate and enormous impact. Almost every month for the past year, I have joined Love Our Street 3162, it's in Caulfield and Caulfield South, Elstwick and Glen Huntly, to collect rubbish in our local neighbourhood. If you don't believe me, you're welcome to have a look at my social media. I often bring my 2 young children with me so they can see the impact of waste and pollution on their community and the places that they love within it. Every week, again on our social media, we drop our plastics into a red cycle bin at the supermarket. I drove here in a hybrid car. In our family, sustainability, conservation and caring for our environment is an important priority. We must adhere to our Paris Agreement commitments. Our economy must transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. And it must be done in a responsible, measured way to protect jobs and families. We need sustainable, reliable and affordable energy. As someone who is passionate about social justice, I've volunteered just here at St Kilda Legal Service, I cannot accept that the most vulnerable members of our community are literally dying because they can't afford to heat and cool their own homes. I have visited them in their freezing cold homes, sleeping in their living rooms, not daring to turn the heater on due to the high cost of gas and electricity. VCOS, St Vincent de Paul and other community organisations have documented their stories and advocated for them. And that's why the government's announcement of the energy assistance payment to 3.9 million of our most vulnerable Australians will make a real and immediate difference to the lives of these people. Recipients of various pensions and payments, including aged, disability, carers, single parents, and I was raised most of my childhood by a single mother, and veterans payments will receive $75 for singles and $125 for eligible couples this financial year, exempt from tax and of course subject to the passage of legislation. The government's 2030 target to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels is responsible and achievable. Indeed, research recently undertaken by Australian National University Professor Andrew Blakers has concluded that the electricity sector alone is on track to deliver Australia's entire Paris emissions reductions targets by 2025. Emissions per person will be halved through a whole range of initiatives and programs across our nation. The $2 billion Climate Solutions Fund will facilitate continued investment in effective abatement from farmers revegetating degraded land to small businesses replacing lighting, air conditioning, refrigeration with more efficient measures, to local community groups and remote Indigenous communities be encouraged to reduce emissions and to improve productivity and sustainability, which of course creates employment opportunities. The $5 million Solar Communities program provides grants of up to $12,000 for eligible community organisations to apply for funding for small-scale solar energy generation and storage projects, because when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, we need to find alternative sources of reliable renewables. And that's why Snowy 2.0, the Battery of the Nation and the Marinus Link projects are so important. Creating an extra 2,000 megawatts of capacity in Snowy, it's enough to power 500,000 homes, and bringing surplus Tasmanian renewable energy to the mainland are practical ways to increase the supply of reliable and renewable power into the grid. Through the Australian Renewable Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the government has invested billions of dollars into renewable energy projects, hundreds of projects, including pumped hydro and large-scale solar. Our economy must transition to a renewable future, but we must do so in a measured and responsible way that protects jobs and the most vulnerable in our community, and that is always undertaken in a global context as part of a global approach to tackling climate change. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. The good news is we're 5 minutes ahead of time. According to my running sheet, that's at least one extra question we get to ask. I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions of the panel, and then I'm going to come to questions from the floor and also some that have been submitted in advance. So everyone has answered my first question, which was, do you accept the science supported by a large majority of experts that human-induced climate change is real and an urgent problem? So they all accept that. The second question is, under the Paris Agreement, Australia has committed to reduce, and I want a yes-no answer here, reduce its emissions by 26 to 28% from 2005 levels by 2030. Will Australia meet that target under current policy settings without using carryover credits from Kyoto? Yes or no?
No.
Nope.
Yes or no answer?
Yes or no answer?
Yes.
Okay. If those Paris targets are met, will they be sufficient to hold average global warming to 1.5 degrees? Will the Paris targets be sufficient on their own?
No. Are we still doing the no?
Yes and no, yes.
Thing?
Yes or no?
No.
No.
So what was the percent, Peter?
So if the world meets its Paris targets, will that be enough to hold climate change to an average global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees?
It's a rather hypothetical question if the rest of the world meets it.
The question is, are the Paris targets sufficient, or do we have to aim much higher?
Well, we've signed up to the Paris Agreement on the basis that comparable countries do as well. So
yes, and my question is that sufficient, or do we actually need to go beyond Paris to tougher targets?
Well, it's sufficient to do our share as part of the global agreement, yes.
So if we meet Paris, we don't have to do anything else. The question is this: is Paris sufficient, or does the world have to go, including Australia, have to go further?
To achieve a 1.5%.
To keep global warming below 1.5 degrees?
I'm sorry, I think we're going around in circles.
I think we are. Let me invite questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll start with one that's come in online while the microphones come to you, and this is a question about Adani. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says emissions have to be halved by 2030, reduced to zero by 2050. In that context, many people say Adani in the Galilee Basin, which is the world's second biggest reserve of thermal coal, should not go ahead. Others say exporting coal from Adani would benefit India and secure jobs in Queensland. So what is your position? And this is not a yes or no answer. You can give a more detailed answer now. What is your position on the Adani mine and other mining in the Galilee Basin?
Thank goodness it's not a yes or no question, Peter.
But I'll get you to keep it brief.
Let me start by saying I don't want to see this thing built. And I don't want to see any other mine in the Galilee Basin being built. Not Clive Palmer's. Not Clive Palmer's and not Gina Rinehart's and not some of the other mines that are waiting. One of the big obstacles that we need to make sure doesn't happen is the train line to walk between the Galilee and the port, which is so crucial as to why we can't have any public money underwriting this, and we can't have any public money underwriting any new coal projects, full stop. So the only other two things I'd like to say is I don't think this mine is going to go ahead. I think that the Queensland government has stopped approvals mainly recently due to the black-throated finch, and we also have seen Adani desperate over the last few years trying to get other companies to co-invest. And of course, recently they announced a significantly scaled down project with no other partners. In other words, no one else wants to invest in new coal assets because the markets are dying. We saw after the Warsaw Conference last year, all of the world's major energy investment companies making a very clear statement that they want to get out of thermal coal in OECD countries by 2030. And if we don't do anything now, we're going to be left with assets that aren't worth anything. So I don't think this thing's going to go ahead. The other thing I would also say is that, you know, I know that there is a lot of pressure on the Labor Party on this, and I hear you. I absolutely hear you, and I'm with you on this issue. There is a lot of the discussions I've had, and some brilliant discussions with the Conservation Foundation, with Stop Adani, Macnamara, and a lot of the other local groups. And this is something that this has been an ongoing discussion around the 2004 decision by the Howard government to block a wind farm by Russell Broadbent, the local member, where that decision, where it was taken as a political decision, was challenged in court, and then in 2004, after the election, the Howard government was forced to grant the wind farm approval. And I don't want to be doing anything where we are giving Adani any extra advantage, whether it's public funds or whether if we do take a political position on this that then gets challenged in court and thrown out. So it is complex, but I don't want to see this mine go ahead.
Okay, Steph or Kate?
It's a little more simple for us. We will block this Adani coal mine, and as much as I like to... And whilst I'm encouraged to hear Josh's personal views on the Adani coal mine, it is simply not enough. We are hearing weasel words, we are hearing equivocation from Bill Shorten, depending on which postcode he's in. If it's in Queensland, it seems like an okay idea. If he's in Victoria, something entirely different. The Adani coal mine is a symbol, as Josh said, of where we stand as a nation on climate change. If we let this coal mine go ahead, we are saying, basically, stuff you to the next generation. Yesterday, Bob Brown dropped into our campaign office, and he's busily organising the convoy to stop Adani. I think Bob was actually hoping to enjoy his retirement, but that's a far cry from that with these sorts of proposals on the table. And he said to me, Steph, in 40 years' time, people will be talking about the campaign to stop Adani like they now talk about the Franklin. Where were you and what did you do, they'll ask. The Greens are standing with the community and the next generation to say, no Adani mine, you are not welcome here.
The resources sector employs about 1 million people, and coal comprises 8% of our economy, about at least 50,000 jobs. I'm actually with Mr. Shorten on this one, and I just want to get his words absolutely right. Mr. Shorten has said there's a role for coal, and he's right. Labor is right. There is a role for coal. While our economy gradually transitions to renewables, there's a role for 50,000 jobs and all the family members of those people who are employed and who are supported by those employees. Mr. Albanese has said, and I want to get this absolutely correct, Labor has to stand up for Labor values, jobs, and making sure the economy can function. He's right. I agree. We must stand up for jobs.
So you support the Adani project?
The Adani project is a private proposal. Like Mr. Shorten said, it's just another proposal. It needs to meet its environmental, financial obligations.
And if it does, it's okay, then it goes ahead.
Well, it needs to stack up on its own, yes.
Okay, we have the first question over here. And look, there's a little bit of a rule for the questions, 30 seconds or less, please. So make sure it is a question.
Thank you. My question is to Steph and relates to a statement by Professor Janet McCalman, a person whom I greatly admire. However, she's...
question, please.
She's a bit crooked on my party, the Greens. She wrote in a letter to Crikey, of course, the Greens will have a better policy on climate change, that was in inverted commas, but they won't get elected. How do you respond to this statement?
Thank you. We've seen Adam Bandt, elected in 2010 in the federal seat of Melbourne. He has He has done an extraordinary amount of work fighting for our climate and for our environment. And we saw in 2012, between 2012 to 2014, it's the only time we've seen emissions drop in the recent decades. We absolutely can win Macnamara. Last election, I missed out by 477 votes. Since then, we've taken in a part of Windsor, a very green part of Windsor, and I've seen reports saying that it's somewhere around 70 votes separating us from Labor. Don't get me wrong, I want to see a Labor government, but I want to see as many progressives on that crossbench, as many Greens and strongly independent, progressive independents on that crossbench to hold Labor to account. We are out door knocking every single weekend. I'm making phone calls to voters every single night. Our pockets aren't lined by donations from major corporations, including the mining lobby, including the pokies industry, including the NRA. We do not accept corporate donations. We rely on community-funded donations, and they're quite meagre, I'll be honest. So our strategy is to talk to as many people as we possibly can. This seat is unique in that we have a real shot of turning it green, and as I said, you have my commitment that climate will be my number one issue in the next term of Parliament.
Okay.
I would just say this, that there are many policies of the Greens that I obviously have, I appreciate, and I think that they are obviously making a lot of sense in a lot of different areas. But this election isn't about me, it's not about Steph, it's not about Kate. This election is about our country. This election is about the direction that our nation will go. And this election is about getting rid of a Conservative government. And every seat that the Greens win is one less seat that the Coalition have to win in order to form government.
Okay.
I want to see a progressive government, and I want to be a part of a progressive Labor government.
Okay, another question right here.
This is a question for Josh, and it's a yes or no answer, please. Having just released a climate policy that makes no mention of gas, stopping coal exports, coal mines or coal-fired power stations, the Australian people are understandably sceptical of Labor's climate policy since it effectively ignores the actual cause of climate change. So as an act of good faith, will you commit to reviewing Adani's environmental approvals and acting on that review before the election, yes or no?
Peter, I need your help here, mate.
Well, do you want to just refer to your previous answer? I think you did give a position before.
So it's very hard to answer that question with a yes or no, because there's so many points that you make, and some really good ones as well. So if you bear with me, I'm not going to say yes or no because I don't think I can. But let me say this, that I don't want to see the mine go ahead, and I absolutely recognise that we need to be moving away from coal. I actually think that we can be transitioning ourselves away from these industries. That's why we want to invest $10 billion in the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. It's why we want to be putting solar and storage capacity in people's homes. It's why we want to be spending $5 billion to connect up renewable energy into our grid. It's why we want to be spending $1 billion into hydrogen and creating new industries and new jobs. It's why we want to be spending and creating...
So let me follow up with a question,
sure.
Josh, and that would be this. Why doesn't Labor policy mention coal mining? Why doesn't Labor say anything about phasing out coal mining, which is phasing out coal mining and coal exports from Australia, which is the primary source of emissions?
Look, we do, and it's in our platform. We have emphatically said that we need to be moving away from coal. We have emphatically said that we need to have no public money in underwriting new coal projects. We are not the Liberal Party. We have not said to Barnaby Joyce that we want to have a feasibility study into new coal. We don't. We need to be investing in renewables, and whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's batteries, whether it's hydro, whether it's looking at transforming our vehicles, whether it's reducing land clearing, whether it's introducing a waste commissioner. I mean, we have a suite of policies that we want to reduce the amount of pollution and carbon in our atmosphere, and we don't want coal to be a part of our future.
Another question here.
Yeah, as an ex-automotive worker who used to work in an industry that was transitioning, for want of a better word, from fossil to electric cars, electric vehicles, as an example, Toyota Australia here in Altona on the other side of the bay were the supplier of Camrys, on right-hand drive Camrys, to the entire world. I'm interested in Kate's comments before about, their policies are about sustaining jobs and keeping working people in jobs that are fit for the future. I'd be interested in each one of the candidates' comments about, as I know Josh touched on it, about where they see automotive manufacturing in Australia going forward.
We're for jobs. We've created over 1 million jobs over the last 5 years. The unemployment rate's 4.9%. We've got a plan to create another 1.25 million jobs over the years ahead. So the track record is there. We're for jobs.
So the specific question was about the manufacturing industry and auto manufacturing in particular. So I might rephrase that question a bit and say, what's your position on supporting the growth of a market in electric vehicles and manufacturing electric vehicles in Australia?
Well, it's a very exciting prospect. I mean, as I said, I drive a hybrid car, so I'm personally invested in it, and because of that, I'm particularly excited that the government at the moment is working on the electric vehicle strategy in the consultation phase, working with the experts around the country, because there are complexities, things like, do we need a common charging plug? Because that obviously affects the costs of setting up. There are regulations, Australian standards and things like that. So it's a complex matter. It's currently underway. And I'm very pleased to see that it's a priority that's being worked on as we speak by those that know best. Advanced manufacturing is the future of the manufacturing sector. Having visited Holden and the work that they do, world-class design and engineering studio in Salmon Street, Port Melbourne, and may I acknowledge Martin Foley, who's the member for Albert Park, Minister in the government and local member in that electorate. Hello, Martin. There are exciting things happening, and at the end of the day, it's all about jobs, jobs, jobs.
So we have a policy. Our policy is to have 50% of new vehicles to be electric vehicles by 2030. And I was actually in Canberra, I remember it well, the day that Joe Hockey goaded the car industry out of Australia. And of course they left. And not only did they leave with thousands of manufacturing jobs and subsidiary businesses, they also left with the largest employer of research and developers and engineers in this country. We want to bring that back, and we want to bring back a car manufacturing industry and incentivise businesses and families and people to be buying and producing electric vehicles in our country.
Thanks, and we have some really exciting policies around bringing in more electric vehicles into the market. But I also want to go back to the broader issue of jobs and employment. And some people have said that Labor's goal of 50% renewable energy by 2030 is really quite ambitious. But as we heard Simon say in his opening, we're actually on track to reach that already. And that's, from what I've heard, quite a conservative estimate of what sort of emissions reductions we're going to see by 2030 with no action. I've actually heard figures around 78%. We're going to reach 78% of renewable energy by 2030 with no action. So Labor's policy of 45% renewables by 2030 could potentially see a retraction of 18,000 jobs in these areas. So there are a huge number of jobs we're talking about. And similarly, we also need to have that plan for phasing out those coal-powered fire plants, because that's where we're going to see the jobs in mine rehabilitation that have been overlooked. That's how we bring back the control into our politicians' hands rather than those of the boardrooms who decide when coal isn't profitable for them anymore.
Okay, I'm going to take a question that's been waiting right up the back. Yep.
The number one individual choice that we can make to mitigate climate change is to go vegan. So what is each of your parties doing to reduce animal agriculture, to phase out animal agriculture, and to promote a plant-based diet? And a follow-up question, are any of you vegan, and if not, why not?
Interesting question. No, I'm not vegan. I've historically had an iron deficiency, so it's important for me to be eating a lot of red meat. I might say that I'm very much a strong supporter, as you wouldn't be surprised, given the party I represent, of personal freedom and personal choice. I think it's entirely up to everyone how they wish to live their lives, as long as they're not hurting anyone else and they're obeying the law, making a decision about your diet, your personal choices. That's a matter for you. I might say it's a rather interesting aside. So Dame Jean Macnamara, who this electorate is named after, saved the pastoral industry in this country, which was being ravaged by rabbits destroying the pastures. And it was her advocacy. She wasn't an agricultural scientist, but she learnt about myxomatosis in the United Kingdom. And it was her advocacy that ensured it was introduced and controlled the rabbit plague that had brought this country to its knees, the pastoral industry. Because of her, grass grew again to feed our livestock, and once again, we were very prosperous in those industries. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm not vegan. As I mentioned, grew up on an organic farm and really believe that low-scale agriculture is the way forward. And I have considered a vegan diet, and I probably should consider it more strongly, looking at some of the emissions that are coming out of agriculture. While we're on the topic of Annie Jean Macnamara, she also campaigned ferociously against the indiscriminate use of pesticides, and that's something that the Greens are also strongly fighting for. And finally, we absolutely need to reintroduce carbon farming initiatives to help to manage some of the emissions that are coming out of agriculture. And I believe there's some really exciting work on the horizon to looking at the diets of animals and on their methane production. So, you know, this decision could potentially be made for us. As recently as this morning, I had a call from my uncle saying, Steph, we need to offload cattle, we just don't have the feed. It's been one of the driest summers we remember on the farm, and perhaps it won't be feasible if our climate temperatures get away on us.
I am not a vegan. Thank goodness Steph isn't either. Labor Party has also come out and absolutely supporting reinvigorating carbon farming. We want to be seeing We want to be seeing more carbon captured by farming, and we think this is a really good initiative, not just for regional Australia, but also for many Indigenous communities. This is a new economy that we can see, and we would like to see flourish. Large-scale land clearing is something that we absolutely need to be addressing. We saw in Queensland the Beattie government and the Howard government's a refusal to fund the end of large-scale land clearing, which is one of the key things to help us achieve our Kyoto targets. We want to see more land being protected and given back to the environment. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question down the front.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello everyone, I'm Ruby O'Rourke and I'm standing as an independent in this election. No, I wasn't able to join because this was organised a lot earlier, so I've been offered a question. My interest is in, if you believe in the science, and I presume all of you believe in the science, and Steph, you're probably the only person on the stage I'm believing at the moment. And I've seen everybody, so many people, applause Eloise here. My question to you is, who holds the legal culpability for the outcomes for Eloise by the decisions that we are making today?
So the question is...
And the second question, I need, who is holding you personally, with your hand on your heart, accountable to Eloise?
Well, welcome to the race, Ruby. It's a lot of fun. Maybe this campaign is aging me a little bit, but I don't think I'm that old yet. And I have a 10-month-old daughter, and we're planning on being around here for a little while. And this is absolutely front and centre for me, and for I need to be able to look her in the eye and say we've done our bit, and that we've done what we could to make sure that we're handing over a fair deal to her. I would echo the fact that Eloisa is a very impressive young woman, and we will do great things in the future.
I think all the parties are going to try and sign Eloisa up.
Yeah.
Anyway. So, Josh, I'm going to tighten it up. We need to keep moving here.
We need to take action. We can talk about targets all we want, but we need to start acting, and that is exactly what a Labor government will do.
Thanks. I'm sitting here because of climate change. I'm running in successive elections because of climate change. I have a 14-month-old. I feel a huge sense of responsibility about this, and it makes me incredibly sad, and it keeps me up late at night. We must change the trajectory we're on. It cannot be business as usual anymore. And
The Fisher report, which is an independent modelling report, shows that Labor's 45% emissions reduction target and 50% renewable energy target will cost the economy 336,000 jobs. It will increase wholesale electricity prices by more than 58%, and it will cut average wages by over $9,000. And these cuts will be even greater without carryover credits. On the matter of culpability, and as a child of the last recession that scarred me permanently, I feel morally responsible to ensure that our economy is working for people, to ensure that people have continued employment opportunities, and these are not easy decisions.
Let her finish her answer, please.
I'm not a United Nations lawyer, so I can't speak about international conventions and that sort of culpability.
So just please let her answer the question so we can move on.
We must take measured and responsible action to ensure we don't put hundreds of thousands of people destitute on the street without employment. Climate change, yes, we have to act, but action comes at a cost. And it's the responsibility of governments to balance those decisions.
Okay, we'll take a question at the back here, yes, and then we'll come over here.
Hello, can each of you outline what you're going to do for the wildlife and indigenous vegetation in this electorate, and how are you going to protect it from developers, the council and state government, and any other things that might threaten it and rubbish? Can you please outline clearly?
The question was, correct me if I'm wrong, what are we going to do in this electorate to help protect wildlife, indigenous plants, habitats?
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes.
One of the first announcements we made was to the old Elsternwick Golf Course. We're going to turn that and partner with Bayside Council and turn that into an environmental nature reserve. It's a really, really exciting project because it's rare that we get to give a piece of land that big back to the environment, and that's exactly what the focus of that land's going to be. And the only other thing I'd mention is that we are going to rewrite our environmental protection laws, and that's going to not just affect this electorate, but all of the electorates. I mean, we are going to, our laws are severely outdated. We're going to create a panel of experts, and it is crazy at the moment that our laws don't properly consider climate change as part of our environmental protection. So we're going to update that, create an environmental protection agency to help enforce them as well.
Well, so firstly, there's climate change, but we'll put that to one side and the need to drive to zero emissions immediately, or by 2030. I applaud Josh at Elsternwick Park. The Greens will also commit to that $5 million, and if we are elected, we will be holding Labor to account on every promise they've made regarding the environment. We'll also establish a new regulatory body, Environment Protection Authority, that is at arm's length from political and lobbying interference. That is one of the biggest problems with our EPA at the moment, and we will also rid our system of corrupt donations that erode our democracy and have disastrous impacts on our ecology, on our biodiversity and our really precious ecosystems. We're facing species collapse, and that's why we must act now, but the number one issue is coal, and we just cannot talk about this debate if we are not addressing coal.
The Coalition Government has appointed Australia's very first threatened species Commissioner, who has a big task, yes, with 545 animal and 1,312 plant species currently under threat. The task is enormous. We face introduced pests. I mean, we spoke of the rabbits a moment ago, foxes, feral cats and other, noisy miners. Introduced pests are a perennial problem. It's about working with different levels of government and acknowledging the different levels of responsibility that are associated with that. There's a lot more work to do in that regard, yes. Yep.
Thank you. Question over here.
I address my question to all of you. I speak on behalf of the four-legged ones who cannot speak for themselves. If we do not help them keep their forests, and if we do not do this, we are going to be in enormous trouble. When are we going to wake up and realise that animals have got rights and that their rights are intrinsic to ours, and that a canine would lay his life down for us? And what have we done to this planet? We haven't looked after it, have we?
Okay. Brief responses.
The Greens are doing everything we absolutely can to arrest climate change and to represent those voices you've spoken for tonight.
We need to stop clearing land. We need to, Queensland has, we need to stop destroying habitats. We need to stop destroying ecosystems. We need to be protecting our marine life. We can't be giving $500 million to the Great Barrier Reef Foundation an organisation that wants to spend $80 million on administrative costs. There was a Senate inquiry into this, and we need to get that money back to actually go towards causes that help.
The government's investment in the Great Barrier Reef, which improves water quality, combats the crown of thorns, starfish and other pests, and supports reef resilience, is a project in conjunction with the Queensland Government, who have made significant investments and who are satisfied as to the governance arrangements of that significant record federal government investment.
Okay, we have a question over here.
So last month, over 50,000 students and myself marched at the school strike with 3 demands. Which were to stop Adani, no new coal or gas projects, and 100% renewables by 2030. Which one of you will best be able to commit to the urgent demands of young people before our planet is destroyed?
Thank you very much. I was also at the climate rally marching with those thousands of students, and it was a great occasion. I've mentioned Adani. I don't want to see this thing go ahead. I've outlined the reasons why I think we need to be a little bit cautious, but make no mistake, I will be doing everything I can to stop this thing going ahead. In regards to coal, we need to move away from coal. We need to be creating new industries to transition. One of the best things I think we did in Victoria, in the Victorian Labor government, was when we saw the closure of the Hazelwood mine fire. What we did and what Daniel Andrews did was create new industry in the Latrobe Valley. What we saw was the creation of Solar Victoria, the government agency that's going to be, or that is responsible for installing 650,000 solar panels on Victorian homes. What we did is we saw a government that didn't leave workers behind and transition and help create new energy, new industry and new jobs for people to move into, and jobs that are good for the environment. I think we can take that example and move it across the world, across the country.
I don't want to see this thing go ahead. What about the 50,000 workers in the coal sector that are unionised workers, that are members of the Australian Labor Party through their union membership? Do they not deserve representation? Shouldn't you be honest with them?
Can I...
And perhaps that's a rhetorical question.
Well, briefly, but I think he's actually answered that question. But let me put another question to you, Kate, which is a follow-up one. If coal-fired power plants are being cancelled around the world, if export markets are showing an increasing lack of interest in buying Australian coal. Why would we be committing to this industry? Why wouldn't your party and the coalition be actively transitioning away from coal? Because it is an industry, according to a lot of what we've heard tonight, that has no future.
I'll answer your question, Peter, then I'll come back to the question about the climate strike. With all due respect, new coal mines are going ahead. They are being constructed, particularly in China, at a rapid rate. And if we were to switch off our coal industry overnight, it would make
I didn't suggest switching it off. I said, why not prepare for the transition?
Well, the question was prefaced with if, which is not the case. So
you don't accept the premise that coal is on the way out? You don't accept that premise?
No, that's not the question that was asked. The question
No,
was
this is my question, is you don't accept. My question was premised on the fact that coal is a declining industry.
But it's not a declining industry. That was the point that I was taking. It's not a declining industry around the world. If we were to switch ours off overnight, the void will be filled by countries who were not subscribing to the Paris Agreement. That is the moral reality of the global situation. So it's important to be very clear about these things, where we fit into a global picture. May I come to the question about the climate strike? Again, I respect individual choice. I respect the choice of parents, how they wish to raise their children. If they wish their children to attend the strike, that is my personal opinion. I'm very happy to say that. On the day of the climate strike, I was at a local school with the Education Minister attending events for the National Day Against Bullying and Violence, which millions of children in over 5,000 schools around our nation were undertaking events on that very important day for that very important issue.
Personal choice isn't enough to save the next generation. It's simply not enough. We have seen a complete leadership void over the decades, and we need action. I am door knocking with 16-year-olds on weekends who are saying, stop messing up our future. They care, they know that we don't have long, they know that our politicians need to act now. As I said, no more weasel words, no equivocating, personally I support this or personally I don't support that. Both of your political parties do not support a rapid transition, 100% transition away from fossil fuels by the time we need to. Both of your parties accept massive donations from coal and gas, and the ALP actually accepts more from the gas industry than the coalition. Dan Andrews has opened up exploration licence off our pristine coasts of Victoria. There is no time for equivocation. To your question of Adani, you know the Greens stand in opposition to Adani, and we will fight. I will be on the blockade if that's what it takes. No new coal or gas. You know where we stand on no new coal or gas. Not just me personally, the whole Greens party. You know where we stand. And 100% renewables, let's just get on with it. And let's stop pitting this as a contest, but environment versus economy. That's not how it works. They work in collaboration with one another, and they are opening...
So I've asked specific follow-up questions of the two other candidates. Now I've got a specific one for you, Steph, and that is this, that exports of coal and natural and LNG, Australia will this year be the largest exporter of LNG in the world. Coal exports have overtaken our iron ore exports. Something like $120 billion worth of exports in this financial year. What do the Greens say they're going to replace that with?
Absolutely, and we're not saying phase it out overnight. This plan, it's a very, very good plan. I encourage you to go away and look at it. It has got a roadmap of how we transition fairly and how we make sure that our workers are looked after as this transition takes place. As I mentioned in the opening, hydrogen, exporting hydrogen is a massive, potentially massive industry for us. Japan and South Korea are crying out for this resource, and we are so well placed to provide it. We need to invest in more greatly in research and development and explore these new industries, but we're not saying phase it out overnight. We have got a plan, and this protects workers, it protects our environment, and it looks out for the next generation.
We need to be transitioning away from coal. We need to be transitioning away from coal, and we have a plan to do it. We need to be growing renewable energies in this country. That's why we want to fund the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to the tune of $10 billion. That's why we want to be connecting up new renewable technology with a $5 billion investment. That's why we want to be creating a $1 billion hydrogen fund. We have a significant plan to try and grow renewable energy. And I've sort of copped it from both sides a little bit. We can transition away and we can save jobs, absolutely. And we shouldn't be investing in new coal technology. The only people in this country that want to invest in new coal technology are Barnaby Joyce in the National Party and Scott Morrison as a Prime Minister. And no one in the Labor Party is saying that we should be investing in new coal technology. We need to be ready to catch workers when those industries fall away. And I'll just say one thing, right? I'll just say one thing. Going back to Hazelwood, right? It was the biggest example of the closure of a coal-fired power station in our state. And I remember vividly that day when Engie announced that they were going to close that mine. The Greens Party released a statement celebrating the closure of that mine, and there were many in the Labor Party. That also wanted to celebrate the closure of that dirty coal-fired power station. But Daniel Andrews released a different statement. It said, here are what we're going to do for all of the workers. And while the Greens Party celebrated, the Labor Party got to work. And I know that the policies that from the Greens Party are obviously, they are right, very good. But we also have a plan to move away from old, dirty-fired coal power station. We have a plan to move away from gas. It's through hydrogen and new industries. We will support workers, but we need to be creating new industries, and that's what a Labor government will do.
You were there, next to the Premier, when the royalties were tripled for the coal-fired power station. You were there when 25% of our capacity for electricity generation was switched off overnight, and then the lights started going out and the blackouts started occurring. So talking about irresponsibility, you were right there when it was all happening. Workers out of jobs, people out of electricity. Lights literally went out because of the loss of capacity. Thank you.
I'm going to take another question at the back here. Yes, with Serge.
So my question is mostly for Kate. You talk about acting responsibly with the economy, but if you think about the climate disaster and how that will affect the economy with houses being submerged, with increasing natural disasters all throughout the world, don't you think that the most economic, responsible thing to do would be to act now to avoid that disaster?
We are acting now. We are acting now in a responsible and measured way, and I accept that many people won't agree with that. You will have a choice at this election to determine who you think is acting in a way that best suits you. I accept that. But I'm not going to make any apologies for standing by people and their jobs, for standing by people and the livelihoods of their families. This is a very clear decision that the Coalition has made to stand by people's jobs. And if the Labor Party won't do it, we will.
Okay. Another question just here. Yes, please.
Hi, Roger Byrne. My question's for Steph. Steph, your little speech before is what I went and voted Greens 12 years ago. And the premise that an independent Greens will put pressure on a government, either ELP or National Party, is great. What I want you to do is, in the last time you were in that position, you failed. Can you explain to me why the Greens defeated the most logical carbon tax proposal that's put us back for 10 years?
I think you'll find that the most recent time we worked with the Labor government is when the only time we've had world-leading climate laws in this country. I think you're talking about a time before that, at a time when Kevin Rudd was negotiating with the Liberal parties. He was not negotiating with the Greens. He presented us with something that would not arrest climate change. It simply wouldn't work, and we were not prepared to lock ourselves into a plan that wouldn't work. Instead, we negotiated with Julia Gillard and we achieved world-leading climate laws. Now, it's the only time we've seen emissions go down. Now, if I am fortunate enough to be elected in this seat, I'm very clear, and the Greens are very clear about what we want. We're being very transparent, and it's all right here in this. And that's more than I can say for the other parties who have not put forward details on how we are going to see this transition take place and how we're going to put a price on carbon. And the Labor Party is too afraid of the Liberal parties running a scare campaign to show the sort of leadership that needs to be shown. As I said, we are not in 2013. I am out door knocking every weekend, and climate is listed as, in every single person I've spoken to's top 3 issues. This is the climate election. We're very clear on what we need to do, and we're looking forward to negotiating with the next, hopefully, progressive Labor government.
Okay, I'm going to take another question up the back.
Macnamara is extremely fortunate to have the unique and nationally significant Port Phillip Eco Centre in the electorate. It's a highly effective and renowned community environmental centre and a hub for other organisations that tackle climate change mitigation through various lenses. The current community facility is no longer fit for purpose, not disability compliant and too small. Port Phillip Council has committed funds for a new building, subject to matching funds being received from elsewhere. If you are elected to this seat, what will you do to secure funding from the federal government for this worthwhile project?
I absolutely echo the fact that the St Kilda Eco Centre is one of the absolute jewels of our local community. The last time I was there was on a Sunday for the Repair Cafe, which is a small group of people who come in and fix things. It's just one example of the brilliant things that the Eco Centre do. I don't have an announcement tonight. I am very aware of the proposal. I have been to the Eco Centre a number of times, including with Mark Butler. We have run through the proposal and watched this space.
The Greens put forward that we would support this funding proposal at the state election, and we're committing to it also at the federal election. It's in our local livability plan that will be hitting mailboxes soon, so we absolutely support the redevelopment of this site and look forward to working closely with the Eco Centre.
I haven't been asked whether I'd like to support it, but having learnt to walk in that park, having played there and spent time with my children in that park, I know it very well. I remember when the Eco Centre was built. I remember when so many developments occurred. In fact, how many of you, like me, fell into the lake off those stepping stones? Now, yeah. So now, and there used to be giant goldfish in there. When people got sick of their goldfish, they plonk it in the lake. So St Kilda Botanical Gardens is of very deep personal significance to me, and I'd be very happy to look at any proposal. So let's talk later. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, hello, my name's Lisa, and this is specifically for Josh. Josh, you outlined a few suggestions that the Labor Party are going to go ahead with regards to transition away from coal. I'd really like you to be far more specific. I'd like a number of things that they're planning, and I'm sure you know more than the 3 that you outlined. And I think that everyone would like to hear that. We are all concerned about the transition away. I think in some ways, personally, it hasn't been made particularly special because that transition has to be made. So I'd like to hear what the ideas are.
We've got another 15 minutes. We'll wrap up. So we've got about another 10 minutes of questions, and then I'll give you each a final 2 minutes.
So thank you very much for the question, and let me try and outline it as succinctly as possible. Overall, we have a target of 50% by 2030. The way in which we believe we're going to get there is financing the Clean Energy Finance Corporation for $10 billion. Now, what that's going to mean is to be able to subsidise renewable energy projects. It's going to be subsidised for solar and batteries in people's homes, offering incentives for people to put it in their homes, to be able to reduce the reliability on a dirty coal-fired power grid. We want to be, if we're going to create all of this new renewable energy, we need to be connecting it up to the grid, which is why we're going to be creating a $5 billion independent energy security and modernisation fund. Fancy way of saying we're going to spend a lot of money connecting all of the new renewable energy up to the grid. We want to be making sure that we are getting people off it. 1 million homes, 1 million batteries to homes by 2025. We want to be creating established neighbourhood renewable programs, similar to what Simon used to do, creating small-scale renewable programs. In short, we need to be building a lot more renewable energy. We need to be providing certainty to energy. And I would just take up one point that was mentioned before. You know, we have seen a lot of politics in this. We have seen the demise of a number of prime ministers in this, and what we actually need is policy certainty. And the Labor Party will provide policy certainty. We've outlined a very detailed policy of what we will do at this next election. And one part of that, believe it or not, is Malcolm Turnbull's old pollution cap safety mechanism. We will work with the worst polluters to bring down a cap. Now, there's two key differences. We're actually going to reduce the cap so that these businesses have to actually reduce the amount of pollution. We're also going to be working with businesses that are emitting 25,000 tonnes or more, not 100,000. But if they go above and beyond the caps that we set for them, what we're going to be able to do is provide credits, and hopefully these credits will be able to be traded domestically and internationally. There is a big, broad program of transferring and investing in renewable energy, and also providing certainty for industry to be able to create the renewable energy generation for a country.
Okay. Yes. In the blue cap.
It's a question for Josh, but also any of the others that wish to answer it. If we are as concerned and angry as I think a lot of us rightly are, then we need to get on to the climate election hashtag on social media after this and let everyone we know that we don't want to see the beaches we love under 1 to 2 metres of water. We don't want to see millions of climate refugees, and we support the student strikers 100%. And a bottom line for those who are trying to hoodwink us from the LNP. I've read this document, this climate solutions package piece of...
So can I have a question, please?
And the bottom line question is, why on earth should we believe the LNP when they've spent 6 years running round in circles and now on this page tell us that half of the emissions that we need to cut actually is magically made to not exist, has been disappeared from your own package. It's a joke. Please get onto social media, please let people know, and please support the student strikers.
I accept you're not voting Liberal, but I am wearing Malcolm's jacket tonight, if that helps.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question over here, and then I'm going to give the candidates... I'm sorry we're not going to get to everyone's questions. One more question here, and then the candidates get a final comment.
Peter. To save time, my question is only for Kate. Kate, you heard Eloisa talk. You saw the standing ovation. You got up and your first words were, "I'm here to listen and to learn." And then you went on and espoused ScoMo's policy rubbish. You used weasel words, and yet you wonder why we don't trust politicians.
So your question?
Yeah. You've carried on tonight about jobs. I was in a plane in Europe about 15 years ago reading amazingly about the fact that Germany had produced 300,000 jobs in renewable energy. We all have to be personally responsible and accountable. So my question to you in front of 500 witnesses is, how can you truly, hand on heart, go home tonight, look your daughters in the face and say you're truly there to protect their future in this planet?
Because I know the damage that Labor governments do to this country. I lived through it. So we will perhaps agree to disagree, but I'm here tonight because it is an important issue, and the job that we are all applying for is someone that represents the entire community, that has the skills, the interests, the passion for this local community. Now, I'm not a politician. Unlike the other people up here, I've never worked for a politician. I don't know what happens behind the scenes. I've never run for federal parliament before. I'm a regular, ordinary person in the community with a small business from a tough working class background who has worked very, very hard to get by in years gone by, and who's very proud of our family that came to this country with nothing. So my conscience is very clear about the future that I would like for my children, and that is exactly why I'm raising my hand to fight for this community. Thank you.
Okay.